Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is it just me, or are we getting really, really tired of being labelled as Muslim women as being like subservient and oppressed and all the rest of it? So, this video is for you to share to correct some of those misconceptions that people seem to have about Islam and Muslim women. So, we see them on the internet, we see ridiculous comments of, oh, she's oppressed and she's under the thumb of the husband or whatever. But let's consider where that is coming from. And this is what I really want to talk about. A lot of people who say that Muslim women are oppressed, A, of course, don't really know any Muslim women, and B, don't even know why they think the way that they do, because there's like a big history to this. So it comes from somewhere, right? Every the way we think, it always comes from somewhere. Now we live in a global village, as we know. Now, what happens with information in villages, of course, is that it gets exaggerated, and you get misinformation, you get truth that's mixed with untruth, and the media, of course, loves to label Muslim women as being oppressed. But actually, let's consider that actually people who are not Muslim are exposed to the same type of misinformation as we are as Muslims, and especially like Gen X, they've been exposed to this from birth, really. So we've got to understand that we're a product of our own history. We're a product of what information goes into us, and also of our lived experiences, what we see on the internet, and all the rest of it. So where does this opinion come from that Muslim women are oppressed? Because actually, when we look at Jewish women who cover their heads, they're not considered to be oppressed in society. When we look at nuns who cover their hair, they're not considered to be oppressed in society either. Now, when we look back in history, the Prophet, peace be upon him, came with change. Now, throughout his life, he emphasizes kindness, women's rights, and spoke against violence and abuse on literally all levels. And he said, peace be upon him, remember that you have taken the women as your wives only under a trust from God and with his permission. And he talks about kindness, and he says, I enjoin you to treat women kindly because they are your partners and your committed helpers. Does that sound to you like Muslim women are oppressed? It definitely doesn't sound that way to me. But ironically, Western women were still fighting for the basics, like the right to vote, just 100 years ago. Now, words and images, of course, are really powerful influencers, as we know. And so where has this perception come from? Now, the perception of Islam and Muslims being like barbaric and terrorist and all the rest of that, it goes back over 1,000 years, as far back as the Crusades and before that. And Islam and Muslims have been presented like that in the Western media since then. Now, this stereotype, of course, is a creation. It's created by the Western imperialist movement. And it showed this picture and shows this picture of barbarianism and dangerous societies and dangerous individuals within that society, which needed the intervention of the civilized white man to correct and guide the misguided. Now, there was actually a big wave post 9/11 of the same narrative. We've all seen it, right? Islam is terror. Women are oppressed. Women need to be freed by Western feminism and all this stuff. And we see constant comparison between the hijab, the veil, and terrorism, and it's really been politicized. And it's viewed by many Western feminists, for example, as imposed by men, which should be removed. And the voice of Muslim women and Muslim communities is often drowned in this narrative. This political bans on veil, and, in France we have the ban of the hijab and women not being able to wear even the burkini on a beach to go for a swim. But what motivates these proposals and these political things to ban the covering? It's not any problem with a face covering or with covering of the hair, but it's this perceived fear of Muslims. And so this perception that Muslim women are forced into the hijab and all the rest of this stuff, we know that some Muslim women are forced into hijab and niqab, culturally, not Islamically. All we need to do is look at certain countries and their authorities to see this. But people need to understand that's not Islam, that is Muslims behaving badly. Now, there are two positions here that we need to talk about. There's the Islamic position and there's the cultural position. Now, in Islam, there is no oppression. Oppression is forbidden in Islam on everyone. Nobody is allowed to oppress one another. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, actually in a Qudsi hadith, which is a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he has forbidden oppression on himself and has forbidden us to oppress one another. And you know that even extends to oppression of animals and to oppression of the environment and all the rest of that stuff. So justice, of course, here we can see it's a foundation of Islamic principles, and it occupies a place next to the oneness of God, next to belief in God. So although hijab is definitely a mandatory part, is theologically, of a woman's dress, to impose it, whether it's a man to impose it, a father, or other women to impose it and to force it, is also incorrect, because it is an act of worship. So we need to think about that when we're thinking about, okay, are women and Muslim women oppressed? The answer is no. Islam does not oppress women. So if any Muslim woman feels oppressed, you need to learn about your Islam rather than maybe the culture that you've been brought up with. And then you will find yourself free to make those choices and understand that what we wear and the way we look, this is an act of worship to God. We're not doing it for our husband, we're not doing it for our brothers or our men or anybody else in this society. We're doing it purely for Allah. And that is my message to you today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.